Two dancers. One man, one woman. The man wears all white, with accents of red on his waist and a colorful bag slouched across his body. His resemblance to a campesino, a laborer of the coastal regions of Colombia, is made complete by the sombrero volteado, which he mostly carries in his hand instead of on his head. As the man moves about, the sombrero guides him as if it were an extension of his arm. His demeanor is gentle, yet determined, as he is lured in by the flutters of a colorful skirt. This skirt, a pollera, belongs to the woman. The colors and ruffles and patterns extend from her skirt onto her blouse, making her impossible to ignore. She holds tight the ends of her skirt and with subtle movements in the arms creates beautiful configurations. With her smiles and elusiveness, she teases the campesino, driving him to work harder to keep her attention. The dancer's push and pull is accompanied by an ensemble of instruments. The primary rhythm is consistent, like a heartbeat to the tune. The dancers, barefoot, shuffle their feet in perfect timing with this heartbeat. Their steps are subtle. Their feet barely come off the ground, creating an illusion of the dancers hovering across the floor. Still, the movement in their steps is enough to cause the slightest shift in hips from side to side. And so the dancers hover around with featured hips, demonstrating a clearly flirtatious interaction. With the swelling of the music, the dancers introduce spins and slight embraces, though they are almost always shuffling. With this, the scene is incredibly clear. This is cumbia. Two things are minimally disputed about the origins of the cumbia genre. First is that it emerged from the coastal regions of Colombia in the 19th century. Second is that the genre fuses traditions from indigenous, African, and European peoples. Professor Héctor Fernández Loest reveals that where scholars and practitioners disagree is in the extent of influence that these three cultures have on what cumbia is actually known to be. Some claim that indigenous communities played the biggest role in shaping the genre, while others lean more towards accrediting enslaved African communities almost entirely. Nevertheless, the result is as follows: a llamador, a tambor alegre, gaitas or caña de milo, and other complementary instruments. As for the dancing to this original form of cumbia, it is clear the partner dance is influenced by the court dances of Spain, which explains why it is so similar to the various partner dances across Latin America, with its male-female combo, the presence of a long colorful skirt, and the inevitable flirting. However, what distinguishes many of these traditional partner dances is their footwork. Ballet folklore from Mexico is characterized by stomps. Marinera from Peru is almost entirely danced on the balls of one's feet, and cumbia is the shuffle step of feet that barely come off the ground. Oral history claims that this shuffling comes from enslaved Africans who were shackled at their ankles and who, therefore, could only dance by taking small steps and creating visuals with the parts of their body that weren't restricted, hips for shifting and arms for decorating space. This is the cumbia of our original scene: the ensemble, the man, the woman, and the shuffling. All of this changes and evolves as cumbia escapes the borders of Colombia in the 20th century and finds new homes all across Latin America. Everybody has their own cumbia. Peru combined their own musical practices with psychedelic rock and, of course, cumbia to create the well-established chicha. Argentina saw cumbia flourish among the most neglected communities of their country, who added strong political messaging over the cumbia beat. Cumbia even found its way to the US, specifically in Texas, where artists like Selena used cumbia to build up the Tejano genre. And of course, if discussing cumbia outside of Colombia, it would be unfathomable to overlook cumbia sonidera from Mexico City. In a plaza, crowds of people are gathered, some immediately on the floor dancing, some standing on the sides observing and taking in the blasting sounds from a nearby speaker. The people dancing are in pairs, with the exception of a few who prefer the freedom of dancing alone. Yet, no polleras, no sombreros, no theatrics. Many of the couples hold each other closely, stepping in unison as one clearly leads while the other is led. Their steps mark the tempo of the song, but barely do more than that. The dancers' hips do not shift dramatically. Instead, their bodies bounce in rhythm, giving the whole spectacle a much more casual feel. A few couples have mastered a much more intricate level of partner work. Using each other's hands as momentum and resistance, the dancers turn, allowing themselves to get entangled in each other's arms and then soon become disentangled. These dancers take up much more space than those who appear practically glued to their partners. All of these bodies, whether bobbing around or swinging into each other, paint the picture of this unique manifestation of cumbia known as cumbia sonidera, a cumbia of the DJs. It was given this name because of the specific role that DJs, or sonideros, have played in shaping the sound of cumbia in Mexico City, as well as Monterrey. DJs were often the ones traveling to Colombia to collect vinyls and bring them back to the Mexican public to share. Using soundboards filled with all sorts of effects and their own emceeing, these Mexican DJs would manipulate the Colombian tracks into their own unique creations. In Monterrey, it is said that the turntables were overheating so badly during a long night of DJing that the machines started slowing down, creating a subgenre of cumbia called cumbia rebajada, or slowed down cumbia. Out on the plaza, the influence of the DJ and this history of cumbia sonidera begins to explain some of the movement of the dancers. Though cumbia sonidera itself isn't always slowed down, the pacing of Mexican cumbia in general is notably slower. This space in the music creates time. Time to take wider steps with more of a bounce than a shuffle. Time to be entangled and disentangled to the swing of the beat. Time to parade around a plaza several times before a song is over. But even beyond the music, the context is equally as important. There is no ensemble of traditional instrumentation. There is instead a DJ, a speaker, and a list of pre-selected tracks that the DJ has curated for any given event. The vinyls that the DJs learned from carried with them a once Colombian tune, but not the visuals of a pollera being used to entrance a campesino, and certainly not the history of enslaved Africans with shackled ankles. Without the cumbia track, a Mexican audience is left with a relatively clean slate for how they want to respond to this catchy beat, how they intuitively feel is the most appropriate way to move their bodies. This, again, is misleading, because all that clean slate refers to is the pre-established knowledge of dance, of music, of social gathering that permeates Mexican culture beyond just cumbia. When you take a closer look, it's evident in the specificities of the dancing. The couples in the plaza that hold each other close and bounce across the floor resemble greatly those who dance norteñas, a genre from northern Mexico where couples remain attached all night long, much like those dancing cumbia. The advanced cumbia dancers, with their turns and their swinging, do not look that much different from an older Mexican genre in dance called polka. The polka is a lot more energetic, but as couples dance, you see the way the male dancer's arms transfer momentum into the female dancer for her to twist and rebound all quite extravagantly. Still, extravagant spectacle isn't only seen in polka. There's quebradita, partner dancing from Sinaloa that's all about tricks and flips and turns, as well as huapango, where dancers love to draw attention with their footwork and grandiose presentation. The point is that if comparing the dancing traditions of Colombia's original cumbia to the developments of cumbia sonidera, there might not be a clear A to B to draw a conclusion from. Maybe such is the case for the dissemination of a music genre, but for dance styles, there are much more local mechanics at work. Next to quebradita, polka, and norteñas, the dancing of cumbia sonidera fits right in, maybe even feels a little tame in comparison, but the demeanor and general embodiment parallels. Cumbia sonidera, or at least the way cumbia sonidera is danced, arguably takes much greater root in the specific Mexican context that encases it. That's not to undermine the influence of cumbia from the Colombian coast, because one cannot say that there isn't any influence at all. Still, with just simply observing the nature of the moves and the tendencies of its dancers, it might not be a stretch to identify the primary influences on the development of the Mexican cumbia that we know today.